Thank you very much, Joe, and welcome everybody. For my sins, I've been associated with International Movement of Horses, I think, for quite a long time. From the early days in Singapore, establishing their international race, right through to the days of the Hong Kong Jockey Club moving in, or attempting to develop protocols for moving horses in and out of China. I'm very familiar with the complications and the frustrations of attempting to move horses across national barriers. But one thing we do have to be aware of is that these movements are controlled by national government authorities. However, we might wish things to be more convenient and simpler. The national veterinary authorities have responsibilities. They're inherently conservative and probably risk aversive. They have other stakeholders that they have to consider and protect. For example, in Australia, there's perhaps a population of 1 million horses outside the thoroughbred population. So while racing is very important economically and it's very important socially, there are a lot of other competing interests that we have to take into account. So to make change, we can't just wish it to be so, and we can't just force it to be so. What we need to do is have systems, and when we make depositions to government to make it easier to move our horses, we have to be able to provide them with comfort that the decision to loosen up controls or to facilitate movement is going to be safe. It's going to protect the national horse population, and that it's based on science and not on business priorities. So what we'll be talking today is some innovative ideas that the FEI in particular has initiated to provide a means to perhaps treat horses that are high performance animals, very, very well cared for under strict scrutiny, a system by which they may be able to move around more easily. We'll look at trying to be develop more consistency and persuade government authorities that consistency is rational, that individual variations in requirements that are not logical are not sustainable. But when we do this, we need to have a science-based approach, and we need to be able to develop trust between government and the racing authorities. A very important example of this I've come in contact with recently is the Werribee Quarantine Centre for the Melbourne Cup import centres. We are very regularly audited down there by government authorities. Initially, we would get things wrong, the audits would identify that, it would cycle back, and now we've gone from a situation where the government was very cautious of us to the point where there is a trusting relationship, and that can make things happen. So industry has a responsibility to be responsible, to work collaboratively with government authorities and to develop that trust. I won't go much further, I don't think, at this stage, except to say that these presentations will look at how the industry can develop this trust, how we can adopt a science-based approach to get consistency, and some perhaps innovative out-of-the-box thinking that may be able to facilitate our movement. What I want to do is just update you on some recent developments in Australia. To our international import protocols, and also to explain how we went about achieving some concessions from the government in terms of what is required of horses coming into for our Melbourne Cup Carnival. It's probably a good example of how authorities need to go about achieving the necessary change. So, just a little bit of background very quickly. The Melbourne Cup Spring Carnival is very, very important both to our industry but also to our city. And there's no doubt that international participation has revitalised the carnival. It's a great point of interest and is critical to the ongoing success. Also, no doubt, travelling horses to Australia is a huge undertaking. There's pre-export quarantine, it's a very long trip, there's post-arrival quarantine, very strict controls. This relates primarily to influenza. Australia is very nervous, very worried about influenza escaping into the general population again, so we have to be very aware of that. So we did have some barriers or things that were causing delays or perhaps putting people off making the journey to Australia, and generally complicated our life to some extent in moving horses. Vaccination requirements was one. The distance separating pre-export quarantines from the local population, that's the quarantine in the country of origin, to provide a means of safely separating horses and ensuring that they don't have contact with other horses that may possibly carry disease and then result in the transmission to Australia. And then on top of that, on arrival in Australia, we had differences in the time that horses might spend in quarantine, depending from where they originated. If they come from one single destination, it was a 2-week quarantine. If they were commingled and arrived from different destinations, the quarantine period was 3 weeks. And that became difficult, perhaps even perceived to be oppressive by visiting horsemen. So to make any changes to that, there is a process, and the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries has a policy review process, and that organisations may make submissions to that review process and present a case as to why they believe certain conditions may be unreasonable or unnecessary or may be modified. But in making that submission, you can't just say we wish it to be so. You have to provide evidence and support that justifies this request. And the government doesn't necessarily do that work itself. It expects the industry to make its case and to present the evidence. So Racing Victoria went through that process. We identified the main barriers, and then we went about trying to work out how can we address these concerns, how can we give the government comfort to give us these concessions, I guess, in the quarantine period. So as a result of those submissions that we made, we did achieve minor in some ways but very significant changes that certainly made it much easier for us to bring horses in, and much more convenient for the horsemen who are travelling horses. So the PEQ period for the commingled group of horses was reduced from 21 days. It's not for commingled horses. The quarantine period went from 21 days to 14 days, which is a very significant advantage. Taking horses out of training and maintaining them in secure conditions is a significant effort. CEM, contagious equine metritis sampling requirements were simplified, that didn't require invasive swabbing, again, which for an equine athlete is a much preferable result. And the most recent vaccination, which was previously must have been administered within 21 to 90 days from the time of departure, was reduced from 14 to 90 days. Again, a small thing, but it does greatly simplify the process. Travelling horses, sometimes the decision to undertake the trip is taken, if not at the last moment, at least late in the process, and that extra 7 days provides quite significant flexibility. So this was a big advantage for us, but as I said, it didn't come easily because we wished it to be so. We needed to provide evidence to support that. Another advantage, sorry, I skipped ahead, but the separation distance from the PEQ facility was reduced from 100 metres to 50 metres. Again, a significant advantage. It's often possible to achieve 50 metres in horse facilities. Achieving 100 metres is often a great difficulty. So that opened up opportunities for new pre-export quarantine facilities at different centres to come online. And then there's the post-arrival quarantine, where horses that came from different regions was reduced from 21 days to 14 days. Again, 7 days, which is quite a significant reduction in percentage terms. And the operational significance of these changes was that it was much easier for us to find suitable pre-export quarantine facilities. There wasn't that invasive sampling of mares and fillies. There was greater flexibility with the time of vaccination, and the decreased quarantine periods were much more attractive to horsemen. It's perhaps saved 2 weeks on the process. So how did we do that? Well, we made that submission to government. And in doing so, it's very important for us to understand where they were coming from, what their objectives are, what their concerns are. You have to build that confidence and trust with the organisation. And over a period of time, we were able to do that. They were much more, perhaps, receptive to our overtures when they knew that we understood their role, that we understood the risks, and that we were not approaching it in a cavalier, careless manner. We also had to identify where the gaps were in our knowledge and our facilities, and plug those gaps and improve those facilities. And one of the gaps we had concerned vaccination and the effectiveness of prevention of transmission and shedding and various aspects of the immunology associated with vaccination. So Racing Victoria took it upon itself to sponsor an equine influenza study. It was performed by Roman Palat at the Animal Health Trust. It was published in the quite prestigious journal Veterinary Microbiology, and it answered quite a few of the questions we had about vaccination. It cost us $60,000, but it was money well spent because it was able to plug that gap in the knowledge that we had. We were able to present it to government, and government were able to take some comfort in having scientific information on which to base their decision making. So that's just a very brief update. One, I wanted to let you know what's happening, but two, I think it's important to look at the process of how you need to go about achieving that change, obtaining the knowledge and building the trust and relationship between government authorities and racing authorities. So, as I said, I was going to be short. I probably do have a few comments to make on the session today. I think we are at a point in time where there's a real significant opportunity for achieving change. I think especially with respect to harmonisation of certification, vaccination requirements, and perhaps general biosecurity in the environment. There is a great awareness. There is perhaps some hope of achieving that. Sometimes it seemed like an impossible dream, but certainly with the involvement of the OIE, we have a great partnership there, and the opportunity to raise awareness and to convince, provide confidence to other veterinary authorities to harmonise and to be realistic in their risk assessments. In fact, as far as certification goes, the International Movement of Horses Committee produced a model certificate some time ago, many years ago, and it is still an excellent document, and we would commend veterinary authorities to have a look at it again and to look at achieving that harmonisation. The document's already out there ready to go. It's been adopted by Hong Kong pretty much, but we believe it has potential for further application. The high performance, high health status horse, it's an attractive concept. I think it's very practical in some environments. I wonder whether it's going to be practical, say, in the Australian context, in equine influenza-free countries. A horse's health status is only as good as the last horse it had contact with. Equine influenza is certainly a potentially dangerous disease for equine influenza-free countries. So I don't know that this concept will work for say, Australia, but there are real potential benefits for many regions in the world. The equine-specific disease-free zone is a viable concept, I think. We've proven it worked in China very effectively, and certainly in places like South Africa and emerging countries, it's a real possibility of facilitating opening up these countries for international movement and competition. One benefit I think that will come of the high health status, high performance horse thing is that to work it will be necessary to improve traceability of horses. It will be necessary to improve the biosecurity of these stables, however it's going to work, that need to achieve that status. So the general biosecurity, general monitoring, surveillance will have to be stepped up in that, and that will only be to the benefit of the horse population nationally and to the health and welfare of individual horses. I think will be a significant additional benefit that will come of this system. African horse sickness, I've been sort of involved one way or another with that since my days in Singapore. I went to Cape Town to look at the facilities. And Peter's quite right, of course, especially on a seasonal basis, the risks are extremely manageable. The benefits are significant not only for South Africa but also for the rest of the world as a source of quality horses, affordable quality horses. And it certainly is a significant and ongoing issue. The problem is with African horse sickness is that while the probability of transmission outside South Africa is very, very low, the potential consequences are disastrous. If say somehow African horse sickness got into Hong Kong, it's entirely possible that 80-90% of the horse population could be wiped out, and it takes a very, very brave regulator to make that decision. And they need a lot of evidence, a lot of comfort, and a lot of science to feel comfortable with the decision that even though the risks are tiny, the consequences are huge. I don't know how we get over that one, but it certainly sounds from Peter as though there's some major steps underway, and we hope that it convinces our authorities that that risk is minuscule and provides them with that comfort to make some decisions.